Experience the future of packaging and processing up close and in action. Explore groundbreaking innovations, engage with hands-on solutions, and connect with the experts transforming the industry. See how these advancements can revolutionize your products, production lines, and business. It all starts here. Don't miss out. Register today at packexpolasvegas.com/unpackedpod. You're listening to Unpacked with PMMI, where we share the latest packaging and processing industry insights, research, and innovations to help you advance your business. Hi, and welcome to another edition of Unpacked with PMMI. I'm your host, Sean Riley, and we have big expectations for today's pod. It has been years since something has moved the needle in the packaging and processing industry as much as recreational and medical cannabis. There are just so many factors in play as the state and federal government continue to disagree on its legality. We are fortunate today to have our resident cannabis expert, PMMI Media Group VP of Content and Brand Strategy, Jim Chrzan, to bring us up to speed on all the latest developments. Jim has spent much of the past year attending events and speaking across the country at conferences about cannabis. Jim, welcome back to the pod.
Thanks, Sean. It's nice to be back for another edition of the Unpacked podcast. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think you might be the first two-timer, so that's something to be proud of. We'll get you a pin or something. So anyway, there seems to be, obviously, as I kind of led in with, an unprecedented level of interest in cannabis packaging. I know we had a white paper last year that still gets as many downloads as anything we have, just because people are so interested or don't have any information to go off of. We see it at the shows. We kind of see it everywhere that packaging and processing are. What are you seeing from the publication side?
Yeah, it's definitely an unprecedented demand for information, Sean. One of the problems is the information changes daily. So it's hard to call anybody an expert because you think you've got your head wrapped around it. Then you hear a different something and you change your mind completely. But we did create this report a couple of years ago. PMMI Business Intelligence added to it, and it's been an unprecedented amount of downloads every month, and it continues like 18, 19 months running, as well as a healthcare packaging editor, Karen Sukni, and I presented at two innovation stages at Pack Expo Las Vegas and Healthcare Packaging Expo, and there was standing room only 6 people deep, and it was fascinating. It was from P&G to investment bankers, so everybody's curious now, and it remains to be seen where this is going to go because it's so volatile.
Just something that popped into my head, but when you speak at like the innovation stages or conferences, as the year has gone on, do you notice, whether it's the questions or the feedback that you get afterwards, that the level of intelligence isn't the right word, but do you feel like the people are learning more about it, or are you still getting people that are coming for the first time trying to just get any information they can about it?
Yeah, so I break it up into two groups, and one is the suppliers of materials and machinery, and they're kind of curious to get involved, or they are getting involved. And if they're from Canada, they're more than willing to talk about it. However, if they're doing business in the States, they kind of keep it more on the down low because they recognize that not everybody may approve of them being in the business. And then you have the people who are literally coming in for the gold rush, and if you're a student of history, you realize that the people who made money in the gold rush were the people who sold tents and camping equipment. It wasn't necessarily the prospectors. So we tell from the supplier side, your biggest danger is maybe not getting paid if a company goes under, whatever. But the people who are getting into the business, I mean, imagine you just sunk your life savings into a flavored vape company. And so they always, where do you think it's going? Or what do you think is the safest? I have no idea because there's so many different examples. And I go to this MJ Biz marijuana site. Every day they send me a newsletter, and every day somebody's run out of money and somebody's suing somebody else, and the top management has been overturned, and California is now heavily busting the black market people, and they're finding it in retail stores with fake labels saying that it's been tested and approved. So there's a lot of concerns about coming out too fast and getting the public involved in products that might not be safe for them yet. And so there still requires a lot of testing and a lot of FDA involvement that really hasn't happened yet, particularly on the medicinal side. Been a block for the last 3 years on any kind of new applications for cannabis research. So this is for soldiers with PTSD or cancer patients, and we need to advance that research so that we can start making true claims and understand about not only cannabis but CBD, hemp based things that have no psychoactive ingredients in it.
Right. Okay. Well, so let's take a step back and say, how do you suggest breaking out of the industry? There's recreational, there's medical, there's edibles. Like, for someone that isn't familiar with all the terminology, it has to be confusing.
It is confusing, and I think one of the biggest distinctions I can draw is buzz or no buzz. The first thing is, if you look at THC, laced cannabis, it isn't your grandpa's cannabis anymore. It's pretty strong stuff. And you have, medicinal, which usually starts out in a state. And I think there's 32 plus states now offering medicinal cannabis, and they've been offering it in Illinois for a while now. There's only 60,000 licenses issued for medical cannabis here in Illinois. So it's not a huge market yet. But then when these states shift over to recreational, and it's either flower for smoking or oil for vaping or the edibles, it really explodes 10 or 15 times the amount of business. So you can see that it started on the West Coast, but it's now coming here to the Midwest with Michigan and Illinois for sure. A strong subset of that is the edible market, which we can talk about a little bit later. But then there's the whole no buzz thing with CBD, which is a hemp based, and it's usually, extracted oils. There's no cannabis. And you see people in Walgreens picking up a hand lotion and saying, if I rub this on my hands, am I going to get stoned? And there's so much confusion still about what's going on that it can get kind of scary sometimes, I think.
And so from the CBD standpoint, just to differentiate, I guess the cannabis oil that comes from the hemp, the idea behind what little I know from the technical standpoint is, like you said, that's not going to give you the buzz. That's more for, treating different receptors in your brain that are going to, for pain and relaxation and things like that. Correct?
Yes, but it takes the pharmaceutical industry billions of dollars to test a drug that says it'll alleviate pain, and anybody can put a hand lotion out and says it's got CBD. What kind, to what strength, what's the dosage. And for the first time now, we saw our legal analyst has been saying now almost a year, CBD has not been approved by the FDA. They have not tested it. They are not appreciating people who are coming out and making claims, although they've said, it's very difficult to regulate all of this. And we have to watch when there's something like the vaping crisis and it rises to the top of the pile, and then they take care of that. But last week, they issued their first 15 warning letters to people who had added CBD into edibles, drinkables, and making some kind of health claim about it. And it could be widely accepted in folklore that it's good to relax you or to ease your pain, but you can't be making those claims without government testing. And so I think the FDA is taking a real stance now. They also put out a paper of what the public should look at in terms of, these things, particularly how they interact when they're processed into something, or how they could interact with children or pets, or, you see dog chews with CBD now. So there's definitely, the FDA is sitting up and taking notice. And I think the vaping crisis really is what brought it to the fore, that we need some kind of testing and some kind of regulations, hopefully at a federal level someday, right? Not state by state.
Right. And I guess I want to get back to CBD, but I was thinking of something while we were talking earlier about the different states and medicinal not being as large as once, recreational comes in, and they're needing to have more supply.
I've noticed that people are backing off of recreational and calling it adult use, which I think.
Oh, okay. Okay. So adult use. So I understand now with that, there's bigger players getting involved. Like, it's not just a guy growing, on the West Coast, where it kind of had always sort of had a black, for lack of a better word, a black market where it was being grown and it was used to taking care of it and cultivating it. You had, small time people that may have been doing it, but now I understand there's some bigger players getting involved.
Yes, and what you found is that there was always bigger players, but they knew crop science or they knew how to obtain the licenses. And when it came down to packaging or branding, they were really at a loss to know how things got into a bottle or a box in the grocery store. So now what we're finding, for instance, we just visited Green Thumb Industries here in Chicago a couple weeks ago. They are hiring CPG brand managers who are talking about the user experience and the importance of branding and packaging. And you just haven't seen that to where now the level of sophistication is definitely raising. One of the problems is as a bigger player, you want to create a system and then go ahead and scale it. So if you've achieved what you wanted to do in Colorado, you could do it in Illinois, or if you've achieved it in Illinois, you could do it in Massachusetts. But the state laws differ about can you grow? Can you grow in retail? Can you only retail? Can you grow and sell to other retailers? And so it makes it very difficult to come up with a model that is scalable. And that's what you find a lot of the bigger players struggling with. They're going to get the formula right for processing the drink. They're going to get the packaging right, but can they work out efficiencies? I mean, you even have people like Green Thumb, they're hiring supply chain experts, and they're traveling at light speed trying to especially gear up for when Illinois goes legal. But, interestingly enough, a lot of suburbs around Chicago have voted they will not have a retail store here. So even if there was a medicinal cannabis shop and you have a license, you have that license, and now you can do recreational or adult use. Different commuters are saying, not in my backyard. So it never ends, the kind of hurdles you have to overcome to get into this business from what I've seen.
And I would have to think that especially with as the company or the bigger players are getting involved, and you were talking about supply chain and stuff like that, it also goes back to, because it's not federally mandated, you run out of product in Illinois, you can't get it from Indiana or California or Colorado because you're not allowed to bring it across state lines, so that's obviously one of the biggest areas of confusion. The regulations are different from, Pennsylvania has it medicinally. I think New Jersey has it medicinally. New Jersey's trying to get it recreationally in the next year. So is any progress on the front of getting it where states can deal with each other? And even bigger, which I know is an issue, is the banking issue. You can't really use anything other than cash because it's the bank could seize it or the government could seize it because it's still not a federally legal product.
Right, and there are some banks, the cash only thing is kind of a myth. There are some banks that can take it, but they're not FDIC insured. So that's the danger that they can run into. But right now, the House Judiciary Committee has approved a Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act called the MORE Act. And this bill would not only remove marijuana from the Schedule 1 classification, but it would decriminalize it at the federal level. It doesn't legalize it, but it decriminalizes it. And also, there's a safe banking bill that's making its way through Congress right now to address what you specifically talked about. But, Democratic support in the House and Republican support in the Senate are, of course, different animals, as we're seeing play out now. And there's still a lot of conservatives that are convinced that pot is a gateway drug. So I don't expect either of these bills to be fast tracked. And it definitely is one of the problems that you can't grow great stuff in Colorado and sell it here in Illinois. And I think that the market will break open when that finally happens. And you've seen similar things happen in Canada, although on a much smaller scale with the population. But this MORE Act being passed and at least decriminalizing it federally be a big step forward for the cannabis producers and marketers.
Okay, so you touched on it a bit with talking about some cannabis packagers that are taking cues from consumer packaged goods companies, CPGs, for how they're gonna handle marketing and branding and the packaging of this. Beyond I want to know more about that, but also, are they prepared or do they have a plan for that day when the switch flips and you are able to get it? Are they getting cues from the CPGs on how we're going to handle it once, how we're going to handle packaging all this product once we can get it from Colorado to Illinois and stuff like that?
Yes, I do think so, and what you're finding is that they're moving into automation, which at first you didn't see a couple of years ago. It was 12 people sitting on the floor snipping, bud and weighing it and putting a label on by hand. They're moving into automation. They're moving into some super sophisticated packaging and user interface ideas. This Green Thumb, I think, just won a Clio for one of their packages, which is called Dog Walker. And if you've seen a big joint tube, they sell you a big joint. Three people couldn't possibly consume it in one sitting. Dog walkers are tiny little joints that come 5 to a pack that you can take out for a walk around the block. And
Oh, while you're walking the
yeah,
dog.
they're really
Okay.
looking at user experience and interface with the packaging, and so I see bright things on the horizon for the branding. And of course, if you're doing gummies, it's been done before. If you're doing tea, if you're doing lotion, you
Right.
got to take your cues from all the industries, bakery, whoever it may be, who've been producing products for years. And so you don't need to reinvent the wheel there as far as how to, package a tincture with an eyedropper. It comes out of the pharma space with the amber glass vials, which are doing very well, by the way, with all the extracts of oils going on. But the problem there is you're all ready to go and you think what you've got is great. And then the cannabis board from your state comes by and says, no, we don't want it to resemble anything from a grocery store. We don't want it to look like a child's product. And suddenly you're taking your great tin or your great gummy idea and packaging in some kind of opaque container that has a child resistant feature on it, because you're chasing the regulatory rules as they change, which is, again, frustrating and expensive for cannabis producers.
For the first time, PMMI members and Pack Expo exhibitors can gain a true insight into the competitive marketing landscape within the packaging and processing industries. See real data from PMMI Media Group campaigns on engagement from validated, verified end users, including the amount of captured leads and even how Pack Expo booth visits align with pre-show marketing. You'll also get a full view of campaign strategies in market across all 12 months for competitors in your product category with variations by channel. This kind of intel has never been available before. Request your custom competitive analysis report now at pmmi.media/CAR. That's pmmi.media/CAR. Yeah, that was actually when you were talking that, they could take cues from the bakery and the, gummies and stuff like that. But, you don't have kids going to the bakery buying cakes that are infused with, adult products as we're calling them now. So yeah, initially that was my first thought was how are you going to make that child resistant, which I guess is something that is another thing they have to tackle.
Right. And you always see the outer big package of, let's say, 20 gummies. It's child resistant. You got to get in that pouch. But a lot of times, once that pouch is open, the 20 chocolates inside are wide open. And you're hearing, kids going to school in Ohio and bringing their mom's gummies. It was for the book group that night. And 12 kids are sick and go to the hospital and the mom gets arrested. And me personally, I do not speak for PMMI or Packaging World. When you get into the edibles market, which everybody says is the biggest growth potential there is, you're talking about your liver processes it different than my liver processes it. So just like a clinical trial for a drug, which helps so many and doesn't do anything and maybe even harms a couple, you've got a lot of people going to a destination bachelor party and they have one chocolate and they're totally fine, and someone else eats 3 chocolates and is on the floor feeling ill, because they have basically what amount you can overdose to cannabis, they'll overdose. And I think that's one of the reasons when you have, big tobacco and big alcohol getting involved, they're going to be able to do the processing and the dosing and, the flavoring at some kind of more professional level. And if you talk to people like Euromonitor or Smithers, there's just no way that the brands that you're seeing today are going to be the brands that you're seeing right in 10 or 15 years as we graduate to a higher level.
Which I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but anecdotally, I would have to think that's kind of how alcohol played out in this. I don't think it was all, there was 10 official national whiskeys 150 years ago. I think you had your whiskeys being made,
Yep.
basically locally, and,
Yep.
it went from there, and then the bigger players bought them all up.
And so if you look at now, the issue with the FDA giving warning letters to CBD, that's not even cannabis. And so you have people saying, oh, it'll be cannabis infused whiskey and cannabis infused beer. Really, the alcohol companies see people doing this mindful drinking thing. And instead of going to the Miller Lite tent at the concert, there's a sobriety tent at the concert. And so what the alcohol people want to do is produce a drink that only has cannabis, not alcohol, and gives you a
Hmm.
mild social buzz. The problem is somebody's going to drink 12 of them, and then you don't know what's going to happen, But so you see more and more responsible people coming in and understanding that testing and regulations is important because, at this kind of burgeoning market, you do not want to give it a bad name. And certainly that's what happened with the vape crisis, with so many of these things being, bought off the street and having no regulation whatsoever of what was going in, including some flavorings that appeared to be dangerous, is what they're saying.
Right. Or things that were being mixed in that didn't necessarily follow any plan of what had been
Yep.
previously used, just to
Yep.
dilute, etc.
Yep. Exactly right.
I mean, I know we've hit on CBD, danced around it a couple times. Obviously, like you said, it's everywhere. I mean, you can go into CVS, you can go into Walgreens, you open a web page, it's it's all over Amazon, whether it's supposed to be or not. You can see it everywhere. And it
Right.
even after talking to you for 20 minutes now, I'm still confused on how do you think it's going to play out? I mean, is it something that will be there? They may nationally regulate before the THC side of it, just because it doesn't have the buzz effect, or what is your expectations?
That's a good point. And I've heard too many anecdotes, either from people whose kids had seizure activity, and CBD oil took care of it, or pain. You talk to ballerinas and dancers; they rub it on their ankles and legs after they finish a performance. And however, you mentioned, going to a website. You don't know where it's coming from. You don't know how it was processed. You don't know
Hmm.
the amount or anything else. And what you do is when you look through the comments section, it's like, this was wonderful. It took away my arthritis. And the next one is, this did nothing for me at all. So it's the same thing as you
Right.
like Tylenol and Advil works for me, or whatever it may be. So I think it would be nice to get that straightened out because, having it in Walgreens and CVS really legitimizes it to the consumer who maybe looked on 30 websites and said, I can't decide what to buy. Suddenly you walk in somewhere where you get your prescriptions filled. That's a pretty big endorsement of this product. And I think the topicals, it's not going to hurt you as far as I can tell. Whether it helps you or not is debatable. And like you said, it's based on who you are and how your brain receptors process these things. But then when you get into the cannabis side of it, and the tremendous medical possibilities that are there. And again, it was so disappointing that under Jeff Sessions, basically, there was 3 years of no new licenses for medicinal. And I think there's some wonderful powers there. I think that there are some people on the pharma side of thing who are a little bit either nervous about cannabis or want to get involved themselves because they see that it has some amazing properties. But you read that FDA warning letters, it's like, this has not been proven to help anybody. Not only that, when you get down into either children or pets, or after you cook it or combine it with other ingredients, you've got people out there, and even a couple of years later, it's the Wild West. So as I say, from a supplier standpoint, if you're doing materials or labels or digital, printing on flexibles, they're creating some fabulous packages. You're starting to see now more automation creeping into not only the harvesting, processing, but the packaging, and I think it's the people who get it down as a process with automation are the ones who are going to emerge the winners, because you cannot be saddled by that much interviewing, background checks, training, hiring, people leave in a couple of weeks, and you've just seen companies, particularly out west, crippled by the whole labor thing. So I think automation is going to play a big part in the future as well.
Finally, we also mentioned that. Is there anything we haven't hit on edibles? That's kind of one of the other things that we talked about earlier. I know we talked about the child resistant. Once you open it, it's lost its resistance. Is there any concerns or developments with edibles beyond the CBD that we've discussed?
Yeah, I think particularly when you get into, cannabis laced edibles, my feeling is personally, again, not the views of the association or the magazines, is you're talking drugs.
Right.
And drugs should be packaged like drugs. And whether it's a blister or a child resistant, twist off the cap, because there's so much danger of once it's open, it's a chocolate, to your grandma or grandpa or to the dog. Or it looks like I saw a soda drink one time out in Washington. It was like little tiny thing at the bottom, serves 3. That's not your cue for a bottle of pop,
Yeah,
right?
right,
You
right.
don't think Pepsi and it'll serve 3 people. So I think there's a long way to go on there. And again, these are just my personal views. I'd like to see it packaged like medicine, where it's tough to get in. And the cue when a child or an adult sees a blister pack with a, poke out pill cavity is that, hey, those are drugs, and certainly when you're talking about pot and cannabis, whether you're eating it or smoking it, it is a drug. And
Hmm.
that's, again, me personally, I'd like it to not be a candy bar or a gummy, although it's certainly happening. You see them everywhere, and I don't want to diss anybody taking that route. But for me, I'd like to see it packaged as serious as any other medicine is packaged, and hopefully someday it will be looked at as medicine. Sean, wouldn't that be wonderful?
Yeah, that seems to be. I mean, that's at least the way that states are taking that first step, whether it's for the tax money or to be, proactive.
Oh, and by the way, most states report that the tax revenues are not as good as they thought they were going to be when they first started. That's pretty much along the line of everybody you talk to. And so
Really?
now some of these growers are more heavily taxed than they thought they were going to be. And yeah, even Colorado has done a pretty darn good job by all rights. They haven't seen the kind of money that they did when they were debating it. But of course, here in Chicago, the tollway was going to save us. Then it was the casinos, and now it's weed. So we'll see where that money goes in the end, right?
Right. Well, that's all I have for now, just because I know we could go for another half hour, 45 minutes if we really wanted to. But I do really appreciate you taking time from your day for this, and I'm sure we'll be circling back in a couple months, based on whatever developments, and when the FDA gets around to hopefully making this more of a national thing than a state by state thing.
Yep, we cover it every week in packaging world. Healthcare packaging covers the medicinal side. Of course, PMMI Business Intelligence is renewing their cannabis study from a few years back. And I'll close by saying that our media partner Smithers just released a cannabis packaging study. And right now, they say the packaging market, which you hear about the cannabis market a lot, but not specifically the packaging market, is about $493 million globally in 2019. That's 68% of it is the US. And Sean, they're predicting 24% growth year over year to 1.63 billion in packaging machinery and materials by 2024. So it's not going away. We just need to try to manage that flow of information and get on top of it.
Fantastic. Clearly, we're on the wrong side of this, and should be in the building and selling of packages for cannabis. Well, again, thank you, Jim, and thank you for listening to Unpacked with PMMI. Be sure to join us next time for more packaging and processing industry insights. Please rate, review, and subscribe. To do that, go to the iTunes podcast or Spotify app on your phone and search for Unpacked with PMMI.